What is the key to success? Is there actually an answer? Well, I think each of you have to come to a conclusion on your own. I hope I am able to give you some good practical advice before you take your first steps out into the real world.
So I started my career back in 1969 in high school, and I decided at that point I was going to be an artist. There wasn't anything else. And so the funny story is I actually did most of my drawing in my math class because my math teacher actually liked my art. Now my art teacher, well, she flunked me. She didn't like what I did. I tended not to follow the assignments, so I started thinking, I should have just done my math in the art class and caught up on that, and then the math class would have been like, hey, you're a great artist, and they encouraged me. So the thing is, I just decided I'm going to teach myself. So I'm really a self-taught artist. I went home and I just painted. I took out a canvas. My parents bought me my first paint set, and the rest is history. I just took that and painted, and I studied art, and on my own. I'm not against art school necessarily, but the way I felt about it, I really had a very clear concept of what I was going to paint. I would go to the museums and I would look at, I would see Rembrandt and Magritte and Dali, and I was very inspired by the different styles, and even Norman Rockwell, Monet, and then current artists at the time, this was back in the 60s, like Peter Max and Andy Warhol, and just things that weren't really anything near to what I would paint. But I could take some inspiration from every artist that kind of all in all showed me the simple lesson that, you go with art wherever you want to take it. And I was just going to paint what I felt, what came most natural to me. Back before even out of high school, I sold my first drawing for 25 cents to a classmate. They, I wasn't good. I didn't know what I was doing at that point, but I had some interesting concepts, and people noticed that, and they would be like, "Wow, you're an artist." They didn't say, "Oh, you're going to be an artist when you grow up." I already, came across like an artist, so I was selling them for 25 cents and $2, and right out of high school, I sold my very first painting for $5. Back then in the 60s, that could get you gas money and a hamburger, and you're set for the beach all day. Come home, I paint, and that was really the start. Very from the beginning, I marketed my art. It was word of mouth. I just kept painting whatever I felt like, and I was selling them. It went up then to $40. I remember the one, it's in the book actually, it's for $5. I remember that one was a picture of Donovan, who's famous for Mellow Yellow. I actually did a painting of him, and I sold that for $5, and I thought, wow, I'm in the big time. Once I got off the, the word of mouth to friends thing, it was time to go public. What will the public think of my art out there in the actual art world? And this was, very nervous for me because I didn't know how I'd be received, so I went out and entered one of the biggest art shows in the United States, which was the Westwood Art Show, second largest. 400 artists, 100,000 people show up, and I'm like, wow, okay, let's jump in and do it. 5 years into my career, I think I'm, if I'm not ready now, forget it. So I jumped out there, and it actually turned out real well. I sold all the paintings there. I won first place, made it into the newspapers. And it was a little overwhelming because, I was going there with no expectations. So I thought, okay, this is very encouraging. I knew at that point, I could make it now as a living. I actually went back. I started getting an apartment, really making an actual living. And I continued from that point doing outdoor art shows and just more experimenting, more painting the things that I wanted to paint. About 5 years later after that, after the art show, the outdoor art show thing, I actually went to another level where I met Wyland, the marine life artist, at an art show. And I hadn't really been in galleries. Galleries weren't one to accept me too much. I was too, I did my own thing. I didn't really do what was supposedly sold. They didn't know where to put me. I didn't have a niche. I was surreal, but I was, what I was. People liked me, but the galleries, they were a little bit iffy. But when I met Weiland, he immediately said, hey, he liked surrealism. Weiland's a marine life artist, but he also appreciates surrealism. He likes to take chances. He's one of the few in the art world, and he had his own galleries. So he immediately said, let's collaborate on some paintings. Before I was even in his galleries, before I even met him personally, he had asked his assistant to ask me if I wanted to collaborate with him. That's a really unique concept to two artists on one canvas, somehow to get along and make the painting work, share a space. And it was quite natural.
I'm going to tell you the secret of our relationship. I do the top, he does the bottom.
That's true, and it's all good with Weiland and Warren together, collaboration.
We would just say, well, I do people, let's do mermaids, and he does the underwater, natural. He'll follow through with his what he does, and we showed him a month later, and I've been in his galleries ever since. That was 17 years ago. Album covers were really one of my original purposes to do, is to be involved in music, but do an album cover, do my art, connect it with music. So I started doing that in the early 80s, and my first illustration job, one of my very first, was to do an album cover for Bob Seger. That was the big thing, but of all things, they asked me to do horses, and I thought, horses? I'm a people painter, don't give me the horse thing. And so anyway, that was Bob Seger, so I pulled it off. I did it somehow and did my horses, and then ended up winning a Grammy Award for that thing. So yes, today I do many horses, but it also made me realize that's a lot of fun doing illustrations. I think it really breaks up the monotony of just fine art, and I want to do so many different things and have my art on so many different ways to be used. That's my purpose, is to go beyond just a niche, but it's broadened out a little bit. It keeps things interesting. It keeps me painting for the last 43 years. So by the time through the 80s, I did about 200 book covers. I did authors like Robin Cook, Arthur C. Clarke, Clive Barker. Just a lot of interesting authors. And I did movie posters, more album covers. One of my fun album covers was doing it for Alice Cooper, which was another musical inspiration for me. I did one for Prince, which was very interesting because Prince is Prince, and I didn't get to meet him, but I somehow still pulled off the painting that he wanted, and that was one of my more challenging, if not the more challenging, illustration. And I thought, hey, that's why I'm in this business. Challenge. You're independent. If it's too easy, it's probably not going to be fun. So that's one of my advice to artists, is to, hey, try these things. You're going to have a lot of experiences. The more crazy experiences you have, the more inspired you are, the more it pushes you to be a great artist, because you're doing things that you wouldn't normally do by some of these commissions that I was given by rock stars and movie producers and, you name it. The requests are sometimes mind-boggling, and I was always up to the challenge to see how am I going to pull this off. Now, by the end of the 80s, I was a little bit done with it. I was ready to get back into the fine art. I was in the Weiland galleries, and he had plenty of galleries to keep me busy, and that's much of what I've done since that time in the 80s. One of the current side projects that I'm involved in right now that, like I said, keeps things interesting is a little project called Fame Wall. And that's in Hollywood and New York so far, where I'll paint a portrait of people that are of, have been inspirational in the arts and the music and acting. So far we had done John Stamos, and John Stamos came and we unveiled the painting together, and it now hangs on the wall up in New York. And we had currently, just a month ago, did the Beach Boys, who are one of my greatest artistic inspirations, and that was fun to have Mike Love and Bruce Johnston of the Beach Boys show up, and I've had a chance to have get to know them and hang out at their concerts, and Mike Love did the foreword for my new upcoming coffee table book. And anyway, the Fame wall is going to be many more portraits, and portraits are something I also do besides illustrations and just regular fine art.